Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is ERNY SYAZWINA binti NORHAKIMI. My matrix number is 12022753. So today we are going to present to you guys regarding to death and bereavement. So what is death? Death is the irreversible cessation of a biological functions that sustain an organism of death. The remains of a former organism normally begin to decompose shortly after death. Death is an inevitable, universal process that eventually occurs in all organisms. But what is bereavement? Bereavement refers to the state of having experienced the loss of a loved one. The most often refers to the time after a loss when emotions are at their most profound. This time is marked by instance, grief, and tremendous sorrow. The term is sometimes used synonymously with grief and mourning. How people experience this time of grief can vary from one person to the next. While bereavement is usually associated with death, can also occur after other significant losses. The end of an important relationship of a major change in a person's health, for example, can also lead to feelings of bereavement. So basically, bereavement is a period of grief and mourning after a death. When you grieve, it is part of the normal process of reacting to a loss. You may experience grief as a mental, physical, social, or emotional reaction. Mental reaction can include anger, guilt, anxiety, sadness, and despair, while physical reactions can include sleeping problems, change in appetite, physical problems, or illness. The question is how long bereavement lasts can depend on how close you were to the person who died. If the person's death was expected and other factors, friends, family, and faith may be sources of support. Grief counseling or grief therapy is also helpful to some people.
First of all, let me see what has been discussed in literature about death and bereavement. We all know that everyone will face death, and some of us have experienced the loss of loved ones. As a human being, we will feel sad and going through bereavement. But what is bereavement? Bereavement is a feeling of sorrow, burden, heaviness, and mourning. The loss is linked to feelings of longing for the person. It also one of the grief expressions, as well as internal psychological process and adaptations of family members. According to the article by Hugh Palmer, bereaved people's experience can be viewed through two different lenses. Firstly, a person who are denying the reality of loss, and secondly, a person who view death of loved ones holistically and consider it as normal. But if the first type of person are not able to adjust themselves well, they will be sad for a long time, and this can lead to mental health difficulties. So, it is important for us to always provide support to people who are experiencing the death of loved one, so that they will not feel alone and always feel appreciated.
The importance of knowing about death and bereavement. Death and bereavement are something that all living beings must go through without exception. Every day, we will be shocked by various news of death and bereavement that we did not expect. Learning about death and bereavement gives us new perspective on life and change the way we live. Understanding the reality of death can move us to take action and get the thing done in our life that we want to do. It also moves us to savor the moment and to appreciate that we have. A part of our journey include the fact that we will all one day die. Next, remembering death and bereavement keep us from doing injustice. A person who remembers death a lot will be far from the cruel deeds of others and commit immorality because he knows that he thus will be held accountable in the hereafter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Al-Quranul Karim, A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Ala yazunnu ulaika annahum mab'usun. Sadaqallahul Azim. Surah Al-Mutaffifin verse 4. Which means, do such people not think that they will be resurrected? Besides, remembering death make one more prepared to go through a moment that is greatly feared by all beings. By remembering death, it will cause us to always be careful not to do something to lead to immorality. We need to know that remembering death does not mean we ask to die quickly or leave all affairs and responsibilities in the world. Instead, remembering that encourages us to set clear goals in life in this world and the hereafter. Humans who often remember the dead will always be aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching over every action taken and will always do good deed in life while living in the world.
Assalamualaikum everyone. So let's talk about the stages of grief. Dealing with our own death usually becomes the major topic of our life only when we are nearing death. People who are dying will have to deal with grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross classified a dying person's behavior and thoughts into 5 phases of grieving, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The first stage is denial. The dying person refuses his or her fate, which is he or she does not accept that they will die. They might say, "No, this can't be happening." The next stage is anger. At this stage, the dying person will lose their passion. They will get more emotional, feeling upset at themselves and always blame their fate. The person will be angry with everyone around him and will continue to blame God's fate. The third stage is bargaining. During bargaining, the person may attempt to change or postpone their death. The person hopes that they will have the opportunity to live a long enough life. The fourth stage is depression. At this stage, the dying person begins to accept their death and start to disengage from others. When someone is depressed, they usually isolate themselves, remain silent, and always cry alone. And the last stage is acceptance. The person will accept their death at this stage because they understand their situation and can establish their own inner peace, which allowing them to be calmer when facing death.
Okay, people cope with loss in many different ways. So here, I have 3 suggestions to consider, which is healthy lifestyle, exercise, and support from family and friends. First and foremost, healthy lifestyle requires you to take a good care of yourself. Try to get enough sleep, eat a balanced food, and avoid using alcohol or any unprescribed drugs for relief. Next, exercises. Physical activity can help you to cope with your grief and keep you healthy. Do any kind of physical activity that you have enjoyed in the past or try a new one. Doing with others might be even more helpful. Next, support from family and friends. People need support from others for their losses. Do not hesitate to accept or even ask for the help or support that you need. Most people are glad to help if they know that you are in need. Some people who are grieving need to tell them a story of their loss over and over again until they have adapted with the situation. Well, this is not bad or unusual, but sometimes family and friends might be impatient or uncomfortable with the repeated conversation. They might not understand that all they have to do is listen. So if you think that this is happening to you, try to talk to your closest family member or your closest friend who is a particularly a good listener. Or you can consider to seek a counselor or attending meetings of a grief support group.
Hello and hi everyone, my name is NURWAHIDA with TARMIZI and my number matrix is 1200148. So, let's continue this video by hearing about the normal system that we will get when we face bereavement. When dealing with bereavement, we will experience 2 types of symptoms, which is physical symptoms and mental symptoms. Physical changes of bereavement can be loss of appetite or weight changes and sleep problems. Most people will lose their appetite, especially when they are in a new phase of bereavement over a loved one. This occurs because of being too sad about the living, being too sick to eat, or being reminded of the occasion of dining with a loved one. Increased weight shift is also possible as a result of a lack of self-care, such as exercising and eating junk food or unhealthy meals in excess. Sleep issues or insomnia are also among the symptoms we will experience after our loved one dies. It can be caused by emotional and mental disease that develop during the first and second weeks after the death of a loved one and may be caused by dissatisfaction or guilt. So for the mental symptoms, many people will experience anxiety and depression when a loved one dies. Anxiety is sometimes caused by a fear of losing a loved one once again, as well as concern about own future and how to live without the person who is constantly with us in narrating everyday events and making decisions. We will also experience depression, in which we will feel lost, uninterested in accomplishing anything, isolate ourselves from people, and believe that life is pointless. If anxiety and depression are not addressed, they can lead to negative outcomes such as suicide ideation.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Next, the history of death and mourning. The mourning tradition of earlier cultures prescribed precise patterns of behavior that facilitated the public expression of grief and provided support for the bereaved. In addition, they emphasized continued maintenance of personal bonds with the dead. As Arias explained, during the Middle Age in Europe, the death event was a public ritual. It involved a specific preparation, the presence of family, friends, and neighbors, as well as music, food, drinks, and games. In various cultures, the outpouring of emotion was not only required but performed ceremonially, in the form of ritualized weeping accompanied by wailing and shrieking. For example, tradition of the death wail, which allow people to cry their grief aloud, have been documented among the ancient Celts. They exist today among various indigenous people of Africa, South America, Asia, and Australia. In a similar way, the traditional Irish and Scottish practice of keening or loudly wailing for the dead were vocal expression of mourning. These emotional forms of sorrow were a powerful way to give voice to the impact of individual loss on the wider community. Mourning was shared in public. In fact, since antiquity and throughout parts of Europe until recently, professional female mourners were often hired to perform highly emotive laments at funerals. Such custom function within a larger mourning tradition to separate the deceased from the world of the living and symbolize the transition to the afterlife. That's all. Thank you.
So, what exactly does Islam say regarding death and bereavement? Is death the ultimate end? Is mourning the dead prohibited? The whole life of a Muslim constitutes of a trial and test by means of which his final destiny is determined. For him, death is the return of the soul to its creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the inevitability of death and the hereafter is never far from his consciousness. This serves to keep all of his life and deeds in perspective as he tries to live in preparedness for what is to come. For Muslims, the concept of death and the afterlife in Islam is derived from the Holy Quran. Allah says in the Quran, "Everyone shall taste death, and only on the day of resurrection shall you be paid your wages in full. And whoever is removed away from the fire and admitted to paradise, this person is indeed successful." The life of this world is only the enjoyment of deception. It is a religious requirement that the body be ritually washed and draped before burial, which should be as soon as possible after death. The dying person is encouraged to recite and declare his or her faith. When a Muslim dies, his or her face should be turned right facing towards the Qibla. Their arms and legs should be straightened and the mouth and eyes closed and the body covered with a sheet. Death is divinely willed, and when it arrives, it should be readily accepted. There should, therefore, be no reasoning by the bereaved as to why they have lost their loved one. Islamic scholars, such as the 12th century theologian Imam Al-Ghazali, stressed that death is unpredictable and can happen at any time, and as such, Muslims should always be prepared for the inevitable and what is about to occur. It is but a gateway from this short but mortal existence to a life of immortality in the afterlife. Mourning over the dead is allowed in Islam, but there is a great difference between what is allowed Islamically and the practice of some Muslims at the present time. Grief at the death of a beloved person is normal, and weeping for the death is allowed in Islam. What is prohibited is to express grief by wailing, shrieking, beating the chest and cheeks, tearing hair or clothes, breaking things, or scratching faces, or saying phrases that makes a Muslim lose faith.
For the conclusion about death and bereavement, life and death are closely linked. We must realize that death is an inevitable part of life. In Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah SWT says, for verse 57, A'udzubillahi minasyaitonirrajim, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Kullu nafsin za'iqatul maut. Every living being will surely taste death. As a human being, they will face two situations toward death. The first is someone who accepts and is ready for death, either their loss of the parents, children, and friends. Second is who cannot accept the death, and the non-acceptance of this death can result in mental illness and the mental illness. We can cope the face of death and bereavement with a healthy and balanced lifestyle, support from the family and friends, and do some exercise. A pleasant death is not just burying our head in the sand, but to make reasonable plans and preparation after death.